They told me not to open the letter. It arrived without a name, sealed in black wax, marked only by a symbol I had seen once in an old manuscript, the serpent consuming its own tail. The ink bled slightly at the edges, as if the words themselves were still alive, whispering in a language older than guilt. I remember holding it under the dim light of my desk, feeling that quiet pulse of dread that comes when something inside you already knows you are about to change forever. Inside, there were only 8 words. The lecture begins when the listener is ready. For days, I pretended not to understand. But the human mind is a traitor to its own peace. Curiosity is its most seductive poison. By the 3rd night, I was already listening for the sound I swore wasn't real, the faint echo of a voice calling from somewhere between thought and silence. It didn't ask. It invited. When I followed it, I found myself not in a room but in a feeling, like the world had folded inward. The walls shimmered with shadows that moved as if aware of my presence. There was a single chair, old and wooden, waiting at the center, and though no one was there, a voice began to speak. It was calm, deliberate, carved from the kind of authority that doesn't ask to be believed. Welcome, listener. You've crossed the first threshold. You are now inside the forbidden mind, where truth is a weapon and understanding comes with a cost. The air thickened. I could feel the sound not in my ears but in my thoughts. It told me that the lecture had been whispered across centuries, hidden by those who feared what it revealed about human nature. Every soul bends reality, it said, but the weak call it fate. My hands trembled as I wrote each word, not knowing why, only that I couldn't stop. The voice spoke of Machiavelli, not the man of politics, but the mind behind the mask, the one who understood that morality was merely a story told by the powerless. It said the lecture had 10 parts. Each would peel away one illusion of the human soul. The first illusion, it promised, was the easiest to destroy, the mask we wear to convince ourselves that we are good. The candle beside me flickered, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw a reflection in the wax, my own face. But smiling when I wasn't, the voice paused. When you are ready, it whispered, look into the mirror. That is where the next lesson begins. And then the light died. I was alone again. But in the silence I heard something far more dangerous than fear. Understanding. Because the second lesson I now realize had already begun. It was waiting behind the glass. The mirror waited for me like an open wound. I had avoided its gaze for years, fearing what might look back. That night after the voice vanished, I stood before it, candle trembling in my hand. My reflection wavered in the flicker of light, familiar yet wrong, as though some faint intelligence beneath the glass was mimicking me, waiting for permission to emerge. When I finally looked, I didn't see a face. I saw layers. The face I wore for the world, the one I wore for those I loved, and beneath them something raw, pale, and silent. The voice from the lecture returned, not from the air this time, but from within my own thoughts. The first illusion, it said, is the self you trust. Every lie you've ever believed was one you told yourself first. I wanted to look away, but the reflection moved closer, its lips parting before mine. Do you think you are honest? It asked. The sound didn't come from my mouth, it came from the mirror. Truth, the voice explained, is never pure. The human mind polishes it, bends it, clothes it until it becomes bearable. People don't crave reality. They crave the comfort of believing they have it. That, it said, is the first secret of control. Give them a version of truth that flatters their fear. I watched the reflection morph. Different ages. Emotions. Fragments of memory stitched together like broken glass. My laughter at 16. My silence at 23. The coldness of every moment I'd pretended to care. The lecture continued. We wear masks not to deceive others, but to survive ourselves. The moment you remove it, you see how fragile your sanity truly is. I touched the mirror, and it rippled like water. Behind the distortion, I saw a figure. A scholar, perhaps, cloaked in shadow, eyes wide with revelation and terror. He was seated before a pile of books, pages covered in frantic notes. His reflection, too, was moving without him, whispering into his ear. He had found the same lecture, and it had broken him, I called out, but he didn't hear. The voice narrated softly. He sought truth until it stripped him bare. The mind cannot face itself without cost. He discovered the mirror mind, the parasite that feeds on our need to be right. The scholar's hand began to scratch words on the wall. "The mask protects you," over and over, until the wall bled ink. Then he stopped, turned toward me, and whispered through the glass, "Don't listen too long." The reflection snapped back to mine, ordinary again, though my eyes no longer felt like my own. I understood what the scholar meant. Once you start seeing the mask, you start wondering whose face you're actually wearing. The candle had burned low. The air was heavy, like the world was holding its breath. And then faintly the voice returned, gentle now, almost amused. "You've seen the mask. Now watch who holds the strings." The mirror went dark. Somewhere beyond its silence I could hear faint music, measured, deliberate, like a puppeteer testing his marionette. I followed the sound. That was how the third lesson began. The sound drew me through the corridor like a thread tugging at my ribs. Each note was deliberate, slow, almost human. It came from a place that didn't exist before the voice summoned it. A door waited at the end, carved with the same serpent symbol as the letter. When I pushed it open, the music stopped. Inside, rows of figures hung suspended by invisible strings. Their shadows stretched and swayed across the walls, though no wind moved them. Each figure was faceless yet strangely familiar. I knew their postures, the way they tilted their heads, the tremor of their hands. They were the gestures of everyone I'd ever known. The voice spoke again, now closer, now calm. "Control is not domination," it said. "It is persuasion dressed as choice." The lecture had entered its third stage, the anatomy of manipulation. I could feel it weaving through my thoughts like a craftsman threading silk through flesh. It explained that every human action is a negotiation between fear and desire, and whoever controls those two strings controls the soul. In the dim light, one figure twitched, then another. I stepped closer and saw thin strands of silver running from the ceiling down into their wrists. When I reached out to touch one, it hummed faintly, alive, resonant, aware. The voice whispered, "Each string is an emotion. When you pull guilt, the body bends. When you pull love, the body kneels." I didn't want to believe it, yet the figures began to move, bending and twisting to unseen commands. They weren't being forced. They were performing, eager, like believers before a silent God. Then one of them lifted its head. I froze. It was wearing my face. The reflection from the mirror had followed me here. Its eyes glowed faintly, the color of dying embers. Its voice was mine, but softened by something colder. "We all dance," it said. "Some just learn the rhythm sooner." I tried to speak, but the words refused to come. I wasn't the one controlling my breath anymore. My reflection smiled, tilting its head like a puppeteer testing his creation. I could feel my muscles responding to thoughts that weren't mine. The voice of the lecture resumed, steady, instructive, merciless. The puppet never realizes the strings were self-made. Every choice, every impulse, each is born from the need to be seen, to be loved, to be right. You do not move freely. You move to be noticed, I wanted to scream. Instead, I laughed. The sound came out jagged, wrong. My reflection mirrored it perfectly. I saw now that the strings weren't silver. They were light, woven from every memory of approval. Every moment I had performed goodness just to be accepted. The more I remembered, the tighter the strings pulled. Faces from my life flickered in the dark. Teachers, lovers, friends, all smiling when I obeyed, all turning away when I didn't. "Freedom," said the voice, "is the cruelest illusion of all. The wise learn to control the strings instead of cutting them." Then came a sound, soft footsteps. A man stepped from the shadows, tall, thin, wearing a scholar's cloak. His eyes were hollow but aware. He carried a small wooden crosspiece like one used for marionettes. "I was once the student," he said. His voice trembled. "I thought I could master the art of persuasion. But I learned that every manipulator is also a puppet. The strings run both ways." He lifted the crosspiece, and I saw invisible lines attached to his own wrists. "We build control to hide our fear of being alone," he whispered. "That's the first string. Love is the second. Together they make us dance." The room began to shake. The hanging figures convulsed as if laughing, the strings humming with sound. My reflection reached toward me through the air. I stumbled back, cutting one of the glowing threads with my hand. It burned like fire, and yet in that pain I felt something terrifying, relief. The figures stopped moving. Silence returned. The scholar's voice faded into the air. "You've cut one string," it murmured. "But there are others, heavier, deeper, wrapped in guilt." The light dimmed. I could feel the next weight pressing against my chest before the lecture even spoke its name. The moment I severed the glowing string, silence devoured the room. The figures that once danced now hung lifeless, like forgotten sins awaiting confession. My hand still burned from the cut, the skin marked by a faint shimmer that refused to fade. The voice did not return immediately this time. It let the quiet expand, as if testing whether I would speak first. When it came back, it wasn't teaching. It was remembering. "Every act of control," it whispered, "creates a debt. And guilt is how the mind collects." The light flickered, and I found myself standing in a different space, a narrow hallway lined with mirrors, each reflecting moments I wished I had forgotten. There was no music here, only the soft echo of my own breath. On every pane of glass, a version of me was trapped mid-regret. The friend I abandoned, the lie I told to be loved, the silence I kept when truth begged to be spoken. I walked past them, and with each step the weight on my chest grew heavier. The voice continued, more intimate now, almost compassionate. "Guilt is the only emotion that feeds on memory. It does not need punishment. It is punishment." At the end of the hallway sat a man on a wooden chair. His head hung low, his hands blackened with ink. He looked like the scholar from before, yet older, worn thin by apology. When he raised his face, I saw eyes hollowed by self-forgiveness denied. "I tried to undo it," he said. His voice was brittle. "Every word I used to manipulate, every choice I justified. But the mind remembers the shape of cruelty, even after the deed is gone." The voice of the lecture intertwined with his like twin serpents. Those who seek control must learn to carry guilt without drowning. That is why the powerful smile. They've learned to walk while bleeding. The scholar reached out his ink-stained hand, pressing something into my palm. It was a small stone, warm and pulsing faintly, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. "Your first weight," he said. "Once you carry it, you will see others who bear the same." The moment I closed my fist, the world tilted. I felt every sin I had rationalized surge through me. Every moment I hurt someone and called it reason. Every time I disguised selfishness as wisdom. The guilt didn't accuse me. It clung to me, tenderly, like a lover that refused to let go. The voice deepened, echoing through bone. "Guilt is not a chain. It is a mirror. Some stare until they break. Others learn to see beauty in the cracks." The hallway of mirrors began to melt, the reflections dripping like ink into a dark pool. I realized the scholar was gone, his chair empty, the air thick with the scent of remorse. I wanted to drop the stone, to free myself from the pulse of guilt in my hand, but I couldn't. My fingers refused. It wasn't a curse. It was attachment. The voice grew distant, softer now, almost mournful. "You've tasted the burden that keeps tyrants awake and saints in tears. But some find comfort in the weight. They call it love." The air cooled. The mirrors shattered in unison, the sound cascading like distant rain. And beneath that sound, faint but clear, came a whisper that no longer belonged to the voice, but to me. "If guilt binds the soul," I said, "then love must be the rope." The darkness stirred, alive, listening, and as the last shards of reflection fell away, I saw the next lesson take shape in the void, a figure reaching out through passion and madness both, eyes wide with devotion and hunger. The voice smiled through the silence. The figure that emerged from the darkness wore the shape of desire itself, familiar, beautiful, and deadly. Her eyes glowed with the kind of warmth that only exists to lure the freezing closer. She smiled, and the pulse in my hand, the guilt stone, began to beat faster, sinking with her breath. The voice of the lecture returned, low and rhythmic, as though reciting a ritual long forgotten. "Guilt is the seed," it said. "Obsession is the bloom." The woman stepped closer, her reflection shimmering in the blackened floor. She looked like someone I once loved, or someone who once loved me. It was impossible to tell which illusion came first. Her presence made the air heavier, softer, like the quiet before surrender. "Do you know why we obsess?" she asked. Her tone wasn't seductive, it was scientific, precise. "Because love demands control," she continued. And when control slips away, the mind calls it passion. The lecture unfolded around her voice like a slow hypnosis. The walls dissolved into dim candlelight, forming a space that felt half cathedral, half confession. Shadows of lovers, real and imagined, danced across the walls. Every gesture between them was a transaction, a gaze traded for validation, a touch sold for belonging. The voice explained, "Obsession is mathematics. A perfect equation of absence and attention. The less they give, the more you invest. The mind confuses scarcity with worth." I watched as one of the shadowed lovers reached toward another who kept retreating, step by step, until distance itself became the source of desire. Their movements looped endlessly, feeding each other's emptiness. The woman turned to me. "When you can't possess," she said, "you worship. That's how love becomes a religion." She touched my chest, and I felt the warmth of her hand melt into the weight of guilt I carried. The stone in my palm dissolved, its rhythm now echoing inside me. I realized that guilt and obsession were not separate. They were stages of the same disease. First you sin, then you crave the pain that proves you still care. The woman smiled sadly as if reading my thoughts. "Love," she said, "is just control wearing perfume." The air quivered. The shadows of the lovers began to blur, their outlines twisting together until they became one form, neither male nor female, just hunger incarnate. The voice of the lecture deepened, resonant and cruel. Those who understand the equation can make others addicted to them. Give them glimpses of paradise, then close the gates. They will crawl to reopen them. The woman's face began to fracture, her smile splintering into several smaller versions of itself. Her voice layered over itself, repeating, "Give, withhold, repeat, until they worship the cage." I tried to look away, but my reflection in her eyes held me captive. I saw myself as both the worshiper and the idol. Every love I had ever chased, every desire I had ever justified, it was all the same formula. Want, deny, return, repeat. The room began to collapse into silence. The woman's figure faded, leaving behind only her whisper. Obsession never ends. It only changes its name. Sometimes it calls itself purpose, sometimes loyalty, sometimes faith. But its core remains the same, the fear of being forgotten. The candlelight flickered once more, revealing a final image burned into the air, a man on his knees, whispering devotion to someone who had already left. And then, as the last flame died, the voice returned, measured, analytical, colder than before. "You've seen desire become a weapon. Now you must learn how love turns to betrayal." The sound of a heartbeat slowed to silence. The air thickened with anticipation, heavy as unspoken truth. The moment the whisper of obsession faded, the room changed again. The walls reformed into cold stone, carved with symbols of eyes, daggers, and hearts split in two. A faint metallic scent filled the air, the perfume of old blood and broken oaths. The voice did not speak immediately. It allowed the silence to tighten, as if betrayal itself were taking a breath before confessing. When it finally returned, it sounded heavier, aged by centuries of deceit. "Obsession gives birth to loyalty," it began. "And loyalty, inevitably, gives birth to betrayal." A single candle flickered at the center of the room, revealing a long table. Seated around it were silhouettes, figures cloaked in secrecy, heads bowed. Before each one lay a silver cup. I took the only empty chair, unsure whether I had been invited or sentenced. The voice continued. "The greatest manipulators never force betrayal. They cultivate it, like a patient gardener waiting for a seed to bloom." The figures lifted their cups in unison, drinking something that looked darker than wine. As they drank, the candlelight twisted their faces into mirrors of pain and pleasure intertwined. Betrayal, I realized, was not violence. It was intimacy weaponized. Across the table sat a man who looked familiar. His hands trembled slightly, and when he spoke, I recognized the tone, the same as my own reflection's voice. "We betray those who see us too clearly," he said. "Because love without mystery becomes terror." The voice of the lecture overlapped with his. "Betrayal is not the breaking of trust. It is the preservation of the self." The man across from me smiled faintly. "I once had a student," he said. "Brilliant, devoted. He wanted to learn the art of persuasion, to understand how hearts could be swayed by silence. His eyes glinted. He didn't realize that to master control, one must first betray the teacher. The candle hissed. The room tilted. In a flash, I understood. The man before me was the same scholar who had appeared in the earlier lessons. The one with the ink-stained hands. The one who gave me the stone of guilt. I taught him everything, he continued. But knowledge doesn't create loyalty. It breeds hunger. He turned my own teachings against me, convincing others that I had hidden the final truth. And so, they chose him. They made me the liar. He reached for his cup, stared into it as though reading history from its depths. I forgave him, he whispered. That was my second mistake. My first was believing love could exist without power. The candlelight flickered violently. I saw visions forming in the smoke. Students turning against mentors. Lovers betraying lovers. Rulers poisoned by their own disciples. The voice spoke through the chaos, steady as scripture. Every betrayal has two victims. The betrayed, and the betrayer who realizes they have become what they despised. The scholar stood, trembling. I see it now, he said, voice cracking. You were never my student. You were my reflection, learning the lesson I refused to face. His cup fell and shattered. The liquid spilled across the floor, forming the serpent symbol once again. The voice grew deeper, resonant with something close to sorrow. In betrayal, the soul fractures. One half becomes regret, the other survival. Both think themselves justified. The figures around the table began to fade, their outlines melting into the darkness. The scholar's face blurred last, eyes locked on mine. Do not pity the traitor, he said. Without betrayal, truth cannot evolve. Then, with a sound like glass breaking inside my skull, he was gone. The candle extinguished itself, leaving only a thin trail of smoke curling upward like a question unanswered. I stood alone in the cold chamber, the echo of his words sinking into me. Perhaps betrayal wasn't something that happened to us. Perhaps it was something the mind invented to continue living after love died. The voice returned, softer now, nearly human. You've learned the art of betrayal. Now look into what it leaves behind. The emptiness that stares back. A chill swept through the room. A faint outline of a mirror began to appear in the dark stone wall, its surface rippling as though waiting for me to approach, and from within it, something whispered my name. Not with affection, but with hunger. The mirror pulsed like a heartbeat in the dark wall. Its surface breathed in slow waves, inhaling shadows and exhaling light. I felt drawn toward it, the same way prey feels the pull of its predator, an invitation disguised as inevitability. The voice of the lecture hovered behind me, calm and merciless. Fear, it said, is the architect of obedience. I stepped closer. My reflection emerged, not as I was, but as I might become. Older, hollow-eyed, consumed. It smiled with the patience of something that had waited centuries for this meeting. You've learned control, guilt, and betrayal, it whispered. Now you must understand the engine that drives them all. The glass rippled, revealing faint images within. Faces I once trusted, lovers I once believed would never leave. But every image was distorted by trembling hands, shaking not from anger but from terror. Fear was the thread connecting them all. The voice spoke again, echoing through bone. People obey not because they are weak, but because they are afraid of what freedom demands. The mirror deepened. I saw a child clutching his mother's hand, begging not to be left alone. Then a man kneeling before a faceless crowd, smiling while swallowing his truth. And finally, me, standing in front of this very mirror, too afraid to turn away. Fear, the lecture explained, is not merely an emotion. It is a currency. Rulers spend it. Lovers trade it. Faith hoards it. It keeps humanity moving in perfect circles of submission. I tried to speak, but my reflection moved before I did. You think you're listening to a lecture, it said. But you've been confessing. The glass trembled. I felt the truth of it. Each lesson I had absorbed, each forbidden truth I had accepted, had only replaced one fear with another. Fear of ignorance, fear of self, fear of what I might do if no one was watching. The voice softened. Fear is the final mask, it murmured. Remove it, and you will see what remains when control, love, and guilt are gone. The mirror began to crack, hairline fractures branching like veins across its surface. My reflection smiled one last time, sad, knowing. You cannot destroy fear, it said. You can only understand who it serves. The glass shattered, spilling light into the dark. The room vanished. In the white silence that followed, I felt the voice lean close, whispering its last command. Now that you've faced fear, you are ready for the truth that bends reality itself. Light consumed everything. The shattered pieces of the mirror floated around me, each shard reflecting a different version of reality. Some where I was the student, others where I was the teacher, and a few where I was neither. The voice that had guided me through every forbidden lesson now spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once. You have seen the roots of power: love, guilt, control, and fear. But they all obey a single principle, the law beneath all others. The shards began to orbit faster, their edges whispering as they cut through the air. In their reflections, I saw empires rise and collapse, lovers destroy each other, saints become tyrants. Every motion was predictable, mechanical, almost mathematical. The final law, the voice said, is simple. Everything living seeks to rule something. Even kindness wants obedience. Even love wants surrender. The words settled like ash. I tried to deny them, but the mirror fragments showed me moments I had buried. Small acts of manipulation disguised as affection, mercy given to preserve my image, forgiveness offered only to maintain control. The truth wasn't monstrous. It was familiar. A figure emerged from the white light. It was the same faceless scholar from before, though now his robes were woven from the same reflective glass that had once been the mirror. You came here seeking knowledge, he said. But knowledge was never the prize. The prize was transformation. He reached out a hand, and in his palm glowed a single symbol, a circle devouring its own tail. This, he said, is the final law. All systems feed upon themselves. Power consumes power. Truth devours truth. Even enlightenment becomes another form of control. The world trembled. The shards began to fall like snow, melting before they touched the ground. To break the law, the scholar continued, you must see through it and then act as though it were never real. His voice thinned, dissolving into the air. But remember, he whispered, those who reject the law are erased by it. The floor beneath me split open, revealing a depthless void, black, endless, silent. I understood now. The final law was not something to obey or defy. It was the realization that every mind creates its own prison and calls it order. The last echo of the voice carried through the dark. You wanted forbidden truth. Now bear it. The light collapsed into shadow, and from that silence something new began to awaken.